Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Today I will be talking about colors and colors and colors, right? I will talk to you about what colors mean in different contexts, how to use them and how to apply them, how to find the right colors for the right product segment, how to communicate the values and the emotions that you want to communicate and evoke the right reactions and decisions from the end user. I will also talk about different scientific papers and other resources and references and tell you what they say about the science behind color. So if you're interested in what the color says about you, what your favorite color potentially means in a product, then stick around and let's go together. I think it's funny, like just the other day, my niece came up to me and asked me what my favorite color was. And I told her that I like a mix between like green and blue. And she was like, all right, cool. And then she basically just sketched an image for me in my favorite colors, right? But it made me think that like children ask so many questions, like what's your favorite dinosaur? I don't know, what's your favorite food? All these things. But most of these questions at one point become irrelevant for us adults, right? But the color is something that sticks with us for our lives. It potentially changes throughout our lives, but every person has a favorite color or made at least the purposeful decision to not choose a favorite color at all. But everybody is aware that colors are a thing and that we relate to certain colors in different ways, and that some colors speak more to us as people than other colors, right? And it's different for everybody, it's very individual. So that's just an example of the huge impact that color have throughout our lives already. But let's have a look at what the science says about the power of color, right? Specifically for the context of business, branding, marketing. One of the sources mentioned that 50% or even more than that chose a brand over another solely for its color scheme. So what does that say? That if you know that you want to get a product and you have to choose between different brands, the color the brands choose is one of the major factor for you to decide for either of the brands. So this is big, right? And that's ever more relevant because many objects nowadays, quality-wise, they are getting closer and closer to each other. Even the low end, and if you don't pay a premium price, all the products of the low end are more or less similar. So the color is really a strong differentiator between the ones that perform similarly. But also in the premium end, like comparing all different premium end products is still relatively close. So the color is still a clear determinant for you as a person, as an end user, as a buyer and consumer to make your decision about which product to go with. So that's a huge impact color has. Color is also particularly effective in impacting impulse purchase. 42% said that directly triggered by the color they made a purchase decision. This whole walkout aisle of the supermarket where you don't have much time to think, they really push colors when you're at your weakest in terms of being conveyed to spend. A study from Germany showed that 68% of the packaging design and color significantly affected the purchase decision. And that even increased to 82% in the beverage industry. So we already see that different industries, different domains, different segments have different roles for colors to take on and rely more heavily on color or not to basically take their market share. And also what we see is that packaging is a huge thing. Like even if the product is not marketed for its color, the packaging even more so can do it and has to do it also in order to compete. Another study found that there's an average increase of 38% in purchase intent at point of sales, like at the supermarket, at the store you are, if there's a coordinated color scheme available. Color preferences are automatically affected by our visual processing and already integrated, taken into account by our thought processing without us consciously being aware of it, right? And based on the impression of the colors that you get, the results of your thought process will be different. So this is huge. You don't have control about it. It's just in our DNA that color is something that impacts us on multiple levels, consciously but also subconsciously. The same study that Adobe shared based on a survey done with 1,000 people from the US also stated that 1 in 3 consumers said that they are more likely to remain loyal to a brand that uses a consistent color scheme. I would never have suggested that the color scheme of a brand is so important to me that I would basically stay loyal to it if it has a consistent color scheme compared to a brand that doesn't have a consistent color scheme. But what does consistency in color say? It does stand for a certain clarity in communication, reliability, but also security and confidence, right? That we don't have to change every season again. That's what we are. That's our identity. That's what we stand for. So it does implicitly already come with some attributes that we potentially consider when talking about branding and colors. 80% said that they feel disconnected from a brand if it changes its color scheme. That's huge. You have to also think in terms of marketing for a company that decides to make the switch from one color to another. It's a huge risk also. The people love what they are used to, what they're accustomed to, and they are afraid of big new changes. Not necessarily afraid, but people like what they know. And then another stat is that more than 1 in 10 consumers have stopped shopping with the brand because they changed the color. So where really the color was the killing criteria for shopping like a brand. I think this is showing the brutal and harsh power color can have, but also we can use it to our benefits. If a brand has a certain color, then that will change how I perceive everything that the brand is related to. So this is where I got some of the or many of the stats that I'm sharing here today from the top color trends of branding 2025 from Adobe. And it's really cool. It has some interesting also visual representations of the stats. Here, for example, they say that consumers first notice about a brand the logo, that's still the biggest. The brand name and the product design still make up a huge chunk, but 60% also notice the color scheme first. That means the color is as relevant almost as the entire design of a product. The psychology of color. So what does color psychology mean? Color psychology basically studies the influence that color has on the emotions of people, on the perception of people, and the behaviors of people. And it also studies how color can shape the user experience and the decision making of people. So what I already mentioned with the purchase intent. And what we usually see is that certain colors carry a certain emotional association with it. White, for example, often is associated with simplicity and purity, black with sophistication and authority, blue with honesty and harmony, right? I guess also most of these things won't be really new to you because there's like an intuitive sense in at least in our cultural spheres for how we understand colors. Green, for example, growth, nature. Yellow, it's energy, it's happiness. It's like bursting out, right? Red is like excitement and passion. From the Adobe survey again, some insights on what emotions were most associated with each of the colors. For example, black was associated with authenticism, blue with calming, gold, confidence. And also they looked into the different qualities. So it's not emotions, but qualities a brand reflects by showing certain colors. So yellow, for example, was seen as being cheap, green, eco-friendly, gold, exclusive, brown, overused, outdated, black, professional. In general, we see a lot that premium stuff is black. And some are also surprising. To me, yellow being cheap was surprising. I didn't feel like I would have guessed that. So it's also still very individualistic, right? What I want to say about the psychology of color is basically that just that even there is a field of study that investigates the effects that color plays in our life on our emotions, perceptions, and behaviors is a huge statement on why it's relevant for us. All right, then color and context. So now that we are aware that each color carries an emotional value or an association with it that is implicit or conscious, we also have to understand that these colors can have hugely different meanings for different contexts and different users also. So the color effects are contextual. They change per product category, per target demographic, per cultural background, and per existing color conventions in a certain domain. And beyond that, obviously, there are much more examples where the color effect is based on the context. But what does that mean? Color effects are contextual for a product category. That means, for example, that if you have a red product, like my favorite plier to show as a showcase, so it's red, it's a tool, right? So in the tool family of products, red means something completely different as if this were to be a kitchen utensil, like a kitchen tool. There, red would convey a completely different emotional undertone. So that's what product category means. Target demographic. That means, are you young or are you old? Are you tech savvy? Are you interested in ballet? Are you like an outdoors guy? Basically, your interests, your age, your demographics, they hugely impact what you prefer in terms of color and what you associate with certain colors. Then we have the cultural background. I think this is one of the most obvious. My first association with India is orange. I don't know, like really strong and vibrant, right? Or Japan, white and red is the flag. Just also different colors from me as an outsider towards different cultures, but also that the cultures themselves have, like what they are used to. I guess red is like a very dominant color in China. So people from China might have a completely different understanding of the color red, maybe see completely different shades of red and can distinct them potentially even better than we can. So that's also something you can train to do, right? You can learn to better understand different colors, see the different values, learn the language also to describe colors in different ways. I remember when I started design and I had a discussion with like a colleague and they would use all these words that were so descriptive and so sharp. It was much more clear for me to understand what they were saying than what I was saying to them, because I was like, okay, this is a dark blue, this is a like not so dark blue. It's like really poor, right? But like if you say this blue is much more saturated but has lower value, it's immediately clear what you want to state if you have to compare it to a blue with a much higher contrast. And like these terms and how they relate to color also allow you to express yourself much more clearly and effectively. Existing color convention means also that within certain product domains, there are certain expectations to the color a product can have. Again, in the tool domain, we have much different colors than we have in the beverage industry, in the car industry, in the smart devices, electronics, consumer electronics industry. So if you are working for a business or you have a client of a certain business, you have to take into account the existing color conventions that are present in the industry. So if you want to do a rebranding and you want to stand out, you can more easily deviate from the existing norms and therefore also stand out a lot. But also this can be a disadvantage or a downside. If you fail to meet the expectation that users have to a certain product category, then they will not associate your product with that category or will not ascribe the same qualities to your product because it deviates too much from their expectations. Using the right color in the right context can improve and give you like huge gains in terms of purchase intent and selling. These can be up to 15%, but that also does not mean that changing different products you have in different categories all into the same shade of blue will not have the same impact across all the categories. You have to be really distinct about your goals in each of these across contexts. I also found some studies that said that in general, overall, that females were reported to prefer more color than male. Not even about the specific shades of a certain color, but just generally they feel more positive about more color in their environment, in the context. And same goes for younger people compared to older ones. So a young person really likes a lot of color compared to an older person that might not be liking as much color in their environment. So that was what studies found to be the case. Obviously, individuals can always be different. So now I want to share with you another website that did like a really interesting experiment on the packaging in different product categories and domains. I will share the link in the description. But basically, they looked at product colors in red, yellow, blue, and black from different categories. And then they showed it to people and asked them to do the validation or evaluation to make sure that it's not like being biased. They changed the order of how the pictures were represented every time. So they randomized basically. And then they used the visual attraction span. So they measured the time that people spent looking on certain images, and based on that, they made statements about the attention grabbing factor a certain color had. And how that translates into in the store is that if you have these products from the same product category next to each other, which of them gets the most attention from a customer in the store. For the chips, they said that the blue color was the strongest, most attention grabbing color, with more than 25.78% of the attention was given to the blue packaging, and at least was given to the yellow one, right? So this is now something that you can take into account when you plan to introduce a product into the chips market. But if you look into like the cleaning bottle, the black bottle here was found to grab the customer's attention the most, and after that the yellow one. So it's exactly reversed. I guess what this study hints at is that in the first brief moments that you walk past something, you don't notice all the details of the differences, but you do notice the difference in color. So that's what this is all about, right? So just to make clear, different product categories can have completely reversed effects on the attention. Now let's talk about brand colors and how brands use colors more specifically. One of the sources basically said that it's estimated that between 60 and 90% of the product evaluation is based on color alone. Again, it's difficult to make a statement like that, right? Because what does that mean? 90% of product evaluation, how is that defined? Does it include the design, the functionality, all these things? Usually they show a picture and then they have to make like an evaluation. Do you like it or don't you like it? How does that translate to the real life case? A much more complex story, right? So also take these studies with a grain of salt, but still acknowledge the power that color has. And here's the basic way that I see brands mostly using colors in their branding. So they have a primary color, which is their recognition anchor. That's the predominant color in all of their like material on their website, in everything that is really recognizable for the brand. They use that color to anchor the expectation. Then they have a secondary color to support this anchor, to provide accents and the contrast. Most also have a tertiary color that is an optional extension. A rule of thumb is that 60-30-10 rule. It's like 60% of the colors being used is the primary color, 30% the secondary, and 10% the tertiary color. Obviously, these ratios also vary strongly between different brands, but that's a good go-to at the beginning. Then if you also work on a product design, there is basically primary color is red. From the same brand, I have this cutter here, right? And here the secondary color would be black. But also we have to make sure that we don't misunderstand the product color for the brand color. I just use this as an example now, but we know, for example, that for sure Uhu is yellow. That's the primary color, and black is, I would say, the secondary color. And then maybe they have some tertiary color like a red or white that they use to give even more context and accents. If you have to create a brand color guide, then this may be a good point to start. Alright, so if we're on Lemonade, for example, and we want to see how brands use their color schemes and color swatches, then we just need to look at like the first image here, for example. We do see that there's one primary color, which is the gray tone, and then we have a highly contrasting secondary color, which is like eye-catching, but it doesn't dominate because we have this calming gray with it, and then we have a tertiary color, which is also more of the calm one, but a darker shade of gray and blue. Green is in there a little bit. And the same thing goes for this other example. What is it? Citroën. Like this concept Citroën car, which is more of this brownish gray with like crazy red accents that is really like going right into your eyes. I think it works well together. Now here they use this also as the backdrop. I think that's an interesting way to apply your colors as a brand for renderings, also for images. And on the right here, we see the same car applied a different color swatch, which is still in line with the overall branding. We still do recognize like some of the ideas. This is more, let's say, this is a little bit wilder, the way they present it, and this is a little bit more serious, right? So that's also the power of color. Like, do you want it to be portrayed as more playful or more serious? How do you choose to represent your object, your product? I mean, this is more from the top, right? This is in the city. Here, I wouldn't say this is going too crazy, even though the red is like a stark contrast. But then I see this image and I say, all right, this is really playful. This is bold. And on the other hand, we have this black one here, and this is much more regular ways to portray the car I'm used to, so it doesn't surprise me as much. It doesn't catch my attention as much. But maybe if I were to buy one, it would be much rather this one than the one on the left, even though this one caught my attention first. But usually you do find that there's one main color in the product, and then there is like some color accents in a varying color, or more than that even. Also from the Adobe study, they looked or asked in their survey which color drive trust in a brand. Most people answered with blue, followed by black colors, and the colors that were driving brand trust the least were pink and red and purple. Again, that completely depends on the context, the presumptions people make. Now I want to talk about color swatches, right? So the color swatches are basically the setup of colors that a brand is allowed to use for anything, and usually they have a fixed color swatch. Now I want to show you how to develop your own color swatch based on the knowledge that we have about colors now. But before that, I want to share some general tips. If you work on something where the color is relevant, make sure to test the color in real world lighting. On the display, the color differs from display to display, from the light in the room you're sitting compared to like another room you're sitting. So this is hugely variable. There are certain image technologies and also services that say that if you install or use a certain type of settings with a certain type of screen, then you can see this as being representative for a certain color. But still, that doesn't even consider the room that the display is standing in. So if you work with color, make sure to test the color in real world if you want to make a final evaluation of the shade of color that you're using. Then also in general, we have the different color spaces, right? RGB, CMYK. Make sure to try to rely on RGB for digital context, right? For websites, for presentations, for everything, for videos, animations that is being planned to be portrayed in the digital. And for everything in the physical world, try to switch to CMYK. So for printing, for banners, for posters. And the hex code is basically just another way to refer to the RGB color space. So it's 6 numbers. The first two, they basically define the shade of red or the amount of red that is in there. The middle 2 digits define the amount of green and the shade of green, and the last 2 define the shade of blue. Then we have the PMS, the Pantone matching system. So Pantone, you probably heard of it. They always have a color of the year that they really market, and they do provide like these color binders where you can look into and see how different colors are being called, what the name is for different colors. And what the system basically is, it provides you with a tool to make sure that colors between different media and different materials is still consistent. So if you order a banner in a certain color that is made from textile, and you print a poster and you want the colors to be comparable, be consistent, then you use the Pantone matching system and see how to make sure that they come together in the same way, right? So this is really useful and impactful, like also especially for printing. It's a color system that is hugely being relied on. And then we have the RA color system. It's also standardized, and this is being used for paints, coatings, and finishes, right? So it's much more relevant for hardware. So if there's like a coating on a certain object, what color the coating has is defined in RAL standards, right? There's also certain like a number and a letter usually, and then that defines, and also like a unique name And if you know how to use them, then you also make sure that you already design and think in these color systems. Not that you have to suddenly basically translate your colors into those systems and then find that the closest gray that you have is more cool. They don't match as well as they did before. So try to be aware of these things while you're doing the work with the colors, and not that you have to change things retrospectively. But now let me show you the tools. So the first one that I show you is Figma Color Palette Generator. It's huge for UX design, like a platform and service software. And how it basically works, it just generates a random color palette, but these different colors, they work together well. So no matter what you do with the random color palette, you will always get a palette that works together. And if you feel like, all right, I like this color, this coral sort of color, then you can lock it in and you can keep going with the randomizing. And now you basically fix this one color and it will find 3 more colors that match that color. So if this will be your primary color, now you can look for deviating secondary, tertiary, and so forth colors, right? Is it supposed to be like more inline? Is this supposed to be like a huge contrast color? You can even lock in the second one and the third one and play around with the last one. And this way really refine your way through to a ideal color palette that works well together, where you can play around with, and then you can get the hex codes, get the color palette. There are also platforms out there that make sure to compare not just the color, but also the value of a color and the contrast between colors. That's also really relevant for UX, but also for product design, industrial design. It is important to make sure that people with color blindness, that cannot perceive color as ideally as other people can, that for them the value of a color is much more important than the actual shade of color, to be able to make a distinction between them. So if you know that you are working for a project that is sensitive in terms of color, or where people are going to be using it that are potentially colorblind, then also make sure that you don't only consider the shades of color, but also look into the contrast between these colors, the context they are being used in, and the value differences. And the final tool that I want to show you is the Huemint. It's really cool. Basically, here are different colors, and you can also press the generate and it will do more. And then you have like some examples already how this could look as a brand. So this is like a monochromatic brand now. We only have 2 colors, and you could see how would this look for products in that color spectrum, in that branding, right? I think that works really well together. They provide ample examples to bring across the point. You have here the hex codes, and you can just generate solution after solution and see if that works, right? So this looks much more like a premium brand maybe. And let's see, yeah, this is much more fresh. I like it, maybe more close to nature than the one before. So you have 2 colors here. What if you want to have more colors? Then you just go to brand and you choose 2 colors, for example. And now you add another color to the mix. And now you can have a impression of how this would look like and generate alternatives again. So I think this works really well. We have the blue and the orange complementary colors, right? On the color wheel, they're opposite of each other, but they still do work well together, especially if they have like a neutralizing color in between to give balance, and not like always have this huge, like strong contrast screaming at you, even though the colors are not super saturated. That also helps. They work well together next to each other without like screaming at you. And again, you can do the same thing with different colors, try different things. The images won't change. Then you can even up it and see what 4 colors would mean. How would that impact the branding potentially? I think this is really nice because it has included all the examples. So you already see how cool this is. And then this is just for branding, but you can also see what if we want to do a website. So this website is now based on these 4 colors. How could that look? What about a website with these colors? Does it suit the technical look of the images better or less good? This feels to me like a much fresher, younger audience appealing. Or this one also really interesting, nice, modern, fresh. This is really going wild, and this more reduced, right? More calm. Maybe you talk much more sensual things here. So these are the associations that I run through automatically by just looking at these things. Monochromatic websites. Here we're in the matrix. Like, I mean, you get the idea. You can also try with different amount of accent colors, see how that works. But what I think what you also find is that the more colors there are, it becomes more complex and also more distracting. It's much more easy on the eye and the user if there's not an overload of different colors. At least that's how I feel it. There is definitely somebody out there that disagrees. Then you can also look into gradients and see what that does. Generate different color gradients with backgrounds, right? I think this is also cool, interesting to see how these things work. Illustration styles I find really funny. But even here, I find the reduced color palettes to work more clearly and communicate more clearly. Right, and these are all the sources that I used for this video. Yes, so that's everything I wanted to tell you about colors. I hope you do understand now the value that color can have, the power it has to guide the direction of a product and to amplify the effect of the design itself already, to be coherent with the brand and speak for the brand, to be identified with the brand and be a representative of the whole business and the company and potentially even the entire market segment. I hope now you also understand that context is hugely impactful and relevant for the choice of color that you want to use for your product and the design. And with this back knowledge now, that you can design products more easily, find the right colors more easily, and integrate them in a way that communicates your message much more clearly and more loudly. So if you like this, then just follow me, like this video too. Let me know what you want to talk about next, what you want to hear me talking about next. And if you